Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. My dogs are going crazy, so you'll have to ignore them. But today I'm going to be reviewing Earth Quaking by H.A. Pruitt. So this is the second book in the Anathalion series by H.A. Pruitt. She is my editor and my good author friend. I already read and reviewed her first book, Anathalion, so I'll have that here as a card. So yeah, this was part of my January TBR list, which is part of me and my cousin's bookish podcast called Pins and Paperbacks. I'll have a link to the podcast here, and our week 1 January, which is where I announced that I would be reading this one. I had a different book first and then this one, but either way, so let's get right into the review. So, yeah, the Anathalion and Earth Quaking is about 4 teenagers who get teleported to this world called Anathalion, and they have these necklaces and they're given a mission. I don't know how much of that would be spoilers, so I'm not going to get into details, but it's basically very comparable to Chronicles of Narnia, in that it's about 14, so I would say it's like young adult YA. My mind's spaced out, so it's young adult YA, Christian fantasy, specifically portal fantasy. So in this one they're fully in Anathalion, and Anathalion ended not really quite on a cliffhanger per se, like loose ends were tied up and everything, but it left them in an interesting place in their journey. So overall, I would say this one had a little bit of a slow start where they were just kind of journeying, and there was a lot of like dialogue and stuff, which isn't a bad thing, but then like I can't remember at what point of the story, but it really picked up, and it was like one event after another that just kept happening, and there's a lot more like action in this one, and it's definitely, I found this one more exciting than Anathalion, which in a series you kind of expect each book to get better than the last one, so that's expected. So my biggest and only really issue with these books is just the fact that they're written for a little bit of a younger audience, and they're written about teenagers, and that's a me problem because I don't really read teenagers very well. I don't know why. It's very rare when a teenager will really, like a book about a teenager or teenagers will catch me and like help me relate to them. And that's the interesting thing about this book in Earth Quaking, especially. Like Anathalion did it too, but like this one especially, really something about the way that she wrote it actually kind of got me invested in the teenagers. There's 4 of them, and the book is told from the perspective of one of them named Kendall, and she's a typical like freshman in high school kind of girl, so I would say probably like 14. So she's a typical teenage girl, but a lot of like her mindset and the things that she like the way she thinks and the things that she thinks is kind of like how I used to be in high school. So like looking at it, I can relate to her in that way. And then there's Ella, who is from Anathalion. The other ones are all from Earth, and she's like the mother of the group. I really compared her, and I'd say she's really comparable to Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender. So she's like the mother of the group. She's always like, she comes off as bossy, but in her mind she's trying to get the group together and make sure they get to where they need to go and keep them safe and remind them about things. And I have that attitude, I tend to do that as well, so I found her relatable as well. And Ella has this unique voice, and I can hear it because I've heard Heather do it before, but she has this like formal, almost a British way of speaking, and she uses the most words possible and talks in circles, and she's just so unique and quirky. My favorite character though is Tad. He is the 16-year-old rebel. He's kind of often rude. He's really blunt. He snaps at people. Him and Ella fight all the time, and that's the other thing that I loved about this book was the character dynamics with each other, but we'll get to that in a minute. And then there's Andrew. He's like this short, kind of pudgy bully. Not bully, he has been bullied, and he's kind of like the nerd of the group. And so in this book, it really brings out, they finally start like, they're journeying alone, the 4 of them together with no guidance, and it's kind of like a lot of it, there's the like, other than the action scenes, the majority of the book is focused on their conflict within one another and their group, because they clash. Like Ella and Tad fight all the time because Tad hates her bossiness and she hates his rudeness and his bluntness, and I love that dynamic, and that clashing like kind of creates this like fun, I don't know, this fun dynamic to read. I really love Tad and Kendall, and how Kendall is the one person that can get through to Tad. Like when he angrily storms off, she's always the one to go after him and to get him to open up about what's going on, and she kind of puts him in a good mood when he's normally not. And then Andrew and Ella have this fun friendship together that they tend to gravitate toward one another as well. But then in this book, you also have moments where the girls are separated, and so Ella and Kendall have these really good moments between each other. That is really nice to read as well. As you can see, I've annotated. I normally do not do this, but I did. Yellow is for like spiritual truths or biblical truths that really hit me hard, that were like biblical lessons or almost like words from God that like I needed to hear at the time. The orange are ones that I relate to, and the green was just like I really loved it. So and I started doing this like a little bit into the book, so I didn't like do it from the whole start. But yeah, so as you can see, I annotated. I normally don't do that because one thing that I love about Heather in general is her ability to weave like spiritual and biblical parallels into a fantasy story. And in my head, I was like thinking of like that it would be a more direct comparison, like in Chronicles of Narnia, where you have a clear, like the lion is literally represents Jesus, and you have these clear, like in the first one, that the first movie is what I'm referring to, you know, he sacrificed himself for Edmund so that Edmund could be saved, and it was like this really obvious biblical parallel, which is like more biblical allegorical fantasy. And so I was kind of expecting that going into the series, but it's more subtle than that, and I really appreciate that because it really puts you in this fantasy world, and it's not so in your face, which in your face isn't bad either, but it makes it subtle to where the truths are there if you're looking for them, but if you're just wanting this fantasy adventure, you're there. And that's the other thing too, is like it's genuinely a super fun fantasy adventure that will just help you escape from reality for a little while. And her books, Anathalion especially, really made me feel like a kid again, and this one kind of kept that going, where you're just a kid going on an adventure with these other kids as they try to save the world. And I love the quirky fantasy aspects where you have no idea, like I have no idea what they're going to encounter next. It's not predictable at all. And it's like you never know what random fantasy thing is going to come up next, because Heather is so creative. There's all kinds of like random fantasy things like rock monsters and tree monsters, and there's these really quirky guys that have these pink feathers in their hat, like not heads, but hat, like feathers, but like a pink pom-pom or something in their hats, and they're like these uppity men that like stick their noses in the air, and like it just stands out to you. There's a talking ferret at one point. I mean, the ferret doesn't directly talk, but there's this insane guy. There's like this like most of they're traveling near this forest following this river, and the forest is like this optical illusion where you get into it, you get lost and confused and turned around. And so it's just like it's filled with these fun, quirky fantasy adventures that is just so fun to read. It reminds me of being a kid and how I would just go play and just imagine myself in fantasy worlds and just like lose myself in that. And that's kind of the heart of being a writer. Like for me, being a storyteller in general is just like I have a passion for stories and telling them and reading them and experiencing them. So the character dynamics, again, was the other thing I really like. It kind of made the whole book because a lot of it is focused on how like they're fighting with each other, and there's a lot of moments where like Kendall had doubt, and like Ella would encourage her, or she would come to some sort of truth. Going back to the parallels, the spiritual parallels are not so in your face. And like in this one, there are 4 different makers, and each one made a different necklace, and each of the kids have a different necklace, and each necklace is like a different element. And as you can see, the one on Earth Quaking is green, with this little golden dragon. The first one I think was red. Let me pull it here. With the golden dragon and the red gem. So I think this one's Kendall's gem. And so it was fun for me when they got to talking about the necklace lore, because it was like, me trying to figure out, okay, which element is going to go to which kid, basically. And I don't know for sure who's going to get water. I'm looking for that one because the next one is water falling and then water rising, so I'm really interested in figuring that out, but I guess we'll find out. And so they're also kind of like Ella especially is developing powers in this one, and they're kind of learning to listen to their necklaces. And so the spiritual parallel, a lot of it is listening to your maker, the maker of your necklace, and it's really, really cool. And there were so many spiritual truths that, like I said, were perfectly woven into the story. As you can see, I have so many quotes. I did read them in a lot of our check-ins on our podcast, like January week 2 and 3 and 4, when I started reading Earth Quaking. Anything that has Earth Quaking on the thumbnail, eventually I started reading the quotes, so go look for those because it's amazing. So yeah, I just, honestly, I really did enjoy it. Like I said, my only complaint really is that it's written for a more younger audience, but you can still enjoy it. And especially if you want to, like, most of us read for escapism, and if you want to just escape from the story and have this fun fantasy adventure, you're gonna love this, especially if you're a fan of Chronicles of Narnia or any other similar series like that. And again, it's the spiritual truths and the biblical parallels and all that stuff is not in your face at all. Like, there's so many quirky, fun fantasy aspects to this story. It's highly recommended. It's super clean. It's so fun. And I would say for me, it's definitely like 4.5 stars. And that's going to be my rating. I think formally on like Goodreads and Amazon, I have to choose an actual whole star, so I'll probably go 4 stars. But it's on the Fable app though, which I'll have a link in the description below to download the app for free, and then you get $5 off their store, and I get $5 off their store if you join. I will rate it 4.5 stars on there because it is on Fable, by the way, in case you guys are curious. So yeah, I just really enjoyed this book, and again, some of the quotes in this are amazing. Also, I do want to point out the cover was designed by Heather. The interior formatting is so gorgeous, and she makes her own illustrations. Like, let me try to get to the first. Before every chapter, you have an illustration, and it kind of gives you a visual for the chapter ahead. And so that was another fun part for me. It was literally just going through and looking at these gorgeous illustrations, and there's so many of them that I was just like, man, I wish I could draw so good. So I love the illustrations. The illustrations in this are so good and definitely worth also getting the paperback for. Like, I'm sure it looks good on the ebook too, but it's just nice having a book in your actual hands. Okay, so at one point Kendall is I think she's in a cave, and she felt kind of abandoned, like she was scared, and so her necklace started heating up, and that's kind of how she knew it was trying to communicate with her. The heat on her skin hushed her negative thoughts and reminded her that even if she couldn't hear or see the necklace, it was still with her. It had not left her alone. And see, that's what I'm talking about when I say that it was very, like, the spiritual parallels are really subtle. Like, it's talking about her necklace being with her, but the reality and parallel with that is that in life, like, we can't always, sometimes we just don't feel like God is with us, yet he always is there, even if we can't feel him or see him at the moment. And it's just such a powerful truth that I'm just like, and also I want to point out that, like, I feel like these books are so God inspired, because I feel like these moments came when I needed them, and that tends to happen. And I've heard Heather talk about that too, where she'll be rereading it or editing them again, and it comes to her when she needs them the most. So, like, if you're honestly like a Christian reader looking for really good Christian content with like actual truths that can actually like encourage you and lift you up and stuff, then you'll really, really enjoy these books, because it was just like riddled with, as you can see, I have a lot of tabs, truths and everything. Another one, Kendall realized that she had heard Hux. He had been reminding her and guiding her the whole time she had worn the necklace. So, like, she didn't realize he was there at the time, but he was there, and he had been there the whole time. Again, back to the God being with us parallel. More than she didn't want to feel crazy or embarrassed, she did not want to be alone. That's the orange tab here. I genuinely relate to that. More than anything else, I just don't want to be alone. So the green tab was this moment where they're talking about where Kendall comes from, which is my home state, and obviously H.A. Pruitt's too. That's how we're really good friends, is because we were able to meet up in person to exchange my books when we edit them. So a lot of that was just like, oh, okay, I know that because that's where we live. So that was really fun and relatable. That was the green tab. Next quote here. So Ella's giving this speech to kind of encourage Kendall, because Kendall was having a lot of doubts. I'll try my best Ella impression. Here we go. We do need them, Ken, and we cannot simply go and hand them over because we feel a bit of persuasion or struggle. We cannot be thrown off our course. You can't listen to him, Ken. He wants you to give it up, but you can't. I don't intend to boss you. I truly don't, but surely you felt it as well. I know you understand that these necklaces are powerful and are changing us. I know you've heard its direction. So she's basically Kendall's having doubts, and Ella's basically trying to tell her, you can't give up the necklaces. I don't want to spoil what's going on, but you can't give up the necklace. I know it's changing us. It's changing me. Like earlier, she said, these necklaces, they've chosen us. They want us to complete the task they've given us. And if we do not need them, if we could do it on our own, don't you believe they would have come to us at the beginning of all this if we didn't need them? Don't you believe the makers would have chosen a pack more able? We do need them, Ken. We must keep them. They are changing us. So it's like we need the God, and sometimes we don't feel worthy, and he chooses us, but he works in our lives in ways that we don't see sometimes, and we can't do it on our own, and we need to learn to rely on him, just like the kids are learning to rely on the necklaces. And that's such a powerful lesson in parallel that it's just it's so good. Next quote. So Ella is again speaking to Kendall to encourage her, and she's describing her father and something that he taught her. And she says that her father says, "Young lady, you are precisely where you ought to be, and everything going on in your life is happening precisely as it ought to be. I found out a long time ago that we can't go thinking this and that is the way it ought to be, because this and that never was. All that you're conjuring ain't the life you was to live. This is right as it's happening right now." And that hit me hard over a time when I was really struggling a couple days ago, over the weekend, a little bit before the weekend, but still, where sometimes you look at your life and you think, this isn't where I'm supposed to be, I should be there, and you think, I want this out of my life, whether you're wanting something physical, or you're wanting a circumstance to change, or you're sick, or a family member sick and you want to be healed, or you're trying to have a kid and you can't and haven't, or somebody's in a tough situation and you're praying for them to get out of it and nothing seems to be changing, or you're in a tough situation and nothing seems to be changing. Maybe you've had a friend or family member who you ended up having an argument or disagreement with, and there's a lot of like betrayal or hurt, and there hasn't been reconciliation. Like whatever circumstances you find yourself in, and you have been praying and nothing's changed, you're not getting out of it, you're still stuck and you feel stuck. It's like whatever, thinking about this and that, like, how did it put that? Like, my goodness, it's so good. This and that is, we can't go thinking this and that is the way it ought to be, because this and that never was. That is so powerful. I cannot tell you how much that has impacted my life reading this, because it's like we often think about what we want out of life, that I want this and that, but the thing is that doesn't exist. This and that, like the things that we keep thinking that we ought to have, is not what we're meant to be, because we're meant to be right here. We are meant to be in these situations whether we want them to be or not, and God has a plan and a purpose for it. And later on, Kendall is having doubts and like about how, well, are they doing us harm? And Ella's response is like something to the effect of Kendall says, "I just don't get why they'd want to do stuff that hurts us." And Ella says, "To keep us from what would hurt worse." Basically, so like to keep us from hurting worse, you know, like God knows. And then later on, Ella basically makes a parallel with, you'll have to ignore my dogs, they're going crazy. Ever since he told me that, I've known that every bit of life happens as it should, never wrongly or mistakenly or out of order, but I've never really understood how many strange, mundane, and mad things can all be for some real purpose until now. You see, it's the makers, Ken. They've made everything, and not just the wood of the trees and things, but a plan and a purpose for all of it, and Anathalion. There's no other way they could know what we must do before we've done it. Do you see? It must be quite like when my papa stews a soup. He takes all sorts of mad bits of this and that, and you can never see how it will all turn out, but once it's done and you taste it, you see how it all worked out. The makers aren't just guessing at where we need to go or what we need to do when they tell us to go somewhere or do something. They know precisely why we four are the ones here, and how all the strange, mundane, and mad bits of this journey are exactly where we need to be when we meet them, and have some reason we may not see until it's all done and worked out. It literally, like, that's literally so true. Like, we don't see how all the little bits and pieces of our life, good and bad, can work together for God's plan. But the reality is that he sees the whole picture and he knows it. And so it really is like cooking a stew or baking anything with a recipe. Like, you don't know how it's all going to turn out. But once it does, you see how every bit and every section and part of the recipe, every step that you took, went into making this beautiful food that you can eat. And sometimes the recipe doesn't work out the way that you were expecting or hoping, but that's like, you end up, you know, doing it again and getting better. So those are just some of the quotes. I love this book, and it's so good, and it's highly recommended. Like, you guys seriously need to go buy Earth Quaking, Anathalion, and read the series. I'll have a link to the books, or Anathalion and Earth Quaking, down below in the comments, in the description, I mean, so you guys can go check it out for yourself. Have you read Earth Quaking by H.A. Pruitt? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And in the meantime, if you liked this video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more writing and reading videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And in the meantime, if you liked my review of Earth Quaking by H.A. Pruitt, then check out my review of Anathalion by Earth Quaking. It was the first book that started it all and got me into this journey and into my little adventure in Anathalion. So check it out. You don't want to miss it.